Hi, and welcome to the 88th TiddlyWiki Hangout. I'm Jeremy Ruston, and today I'm joined by only one guest, Matthias Goldman. Hi, Matt. Would you like to say hello and introduce yourself in the usual way?
Yes, I am Matt from Stockholm, Sweden. Long-time Tiddly user. I'm getting to learn more and more, and it's getting even more fun than before. My main site for presenting things is twaddle.tiddlyspot.com. It's a bunch of brain dumpy things with lots of ideas.
And we'll be looking at that a little later. As for previous handful of Hangouts, I've created a TiddlySpot, especially for the Hangout, that has an agenda on it. It's not actually in any particular order, but let me share my screen and show it to you. So I've got briefly talking about some of the new features in 5.1.10. In fact, I think 5.1.9 was released since the last Hangout, so there may be features in 5.1.9 that we haven't talked about in Hangouts. To talk about Twaddle, to show Twaddle, which is the Matt's site that he mentioned a moment ago. Then there's a specific issue to do with the way that search results are displayed in the sidebar. That's been under a lot of discussion for quite a long time, and I don't think we've ever actually discussed it within Hangout, but it seems like a good moment to do so, to try and bring that to a close. Then there's a discussion that's, the pitfalls. There's a discussion that has been went on for a while and then went, I think actually went silent about a week ago, just as I went into a bit of a week or so where I wasn't paying much attention to the group. And that was about editions, the purpose of editions in TiddlyWiki and what they're for and how far away from what they should be capable of doing we are at the moment. And then talking about federation and the plugin library is something that we will do if we get time. Matt, why don't we kick off with talking about Twaddle so that so that I'm not doing all of the work. But let me first introduce Twaddle. So for that, I'm going to go back to screen sharing. So Matt, as Matt said in his introduction, has been part of the TiddlyWiki for quite some time, several years. But over the last year and a half, has been building to a crescendo in terms of his contributions to TiddlyWiki. And there's already spots of his that we've shown on previous Hangouts. But he's put together a new one called Twaddle, which is I think you used the word musings in your introduction. It's a load of topics and very tightly written. Some of the things that I really love about it is actually the proposals, which are very detailed proposals, particularly like this one, for how TiddlyWiki could work. And this is the kind of dialogue that I really love. I find it very thought-provoking. It tracks my own thoughts. I think the thing that really sets Matt apart is that he takes the trouble to write this stuff out in a way that makes it easy for other people to understand what he's thinking of, what you're thinking of, Matt, and what you're suggesting. So I highly recommend settling down for half an hour to have a read of Twaddle. Matt, let me stop screen sharing and start by asking you, I assume you know exactly what Twaddle means in English.
I do, actually, yes. Babble or something like that. And I mean, it's just that I have all these ideas all the time, and because of the amount of them, I think that it's in some. It wouldn't be totally unfair to call it twaddle in a way. I mean, I think it makes sense.
Well, there's. I mean, I must bicker with you here because, and in fact, twaddle has an undertone of meaninglessness, which I think does a discredit to the way that you write. As I say, the ability to write well and clearly remains a comparative rarity in the TiddlyWiki community, as it is in, I think, in most open source projects, or many open source projects. And so to me, your material is far from twaddle, but I appreciate the joke.
Thank you. That's very flattering to hear. That's very flattering to hear. You know, there is always, when I write things, I'm always a bit, you know, some things obviously go against other people's ideas, and obviously yours, because you're the tone setter for most of the things, of course. So I'm always a bit, you know, I hope no one is, I hope that it's clear that my intention is just simply sharing what I think, ideas that people can accept or dismiss. I just want people to think them and say for themselves, okay, this is a decent idea or this is a bad idea. Then at least I know that, okay, fair enough, people don't like that idea. Then I know, then I've, you know, done what I can in that part, because I can code. So
it's almost as if you're worried. I mean, worry, I'm not sure worried is necessarily the right word, but that there's a concern that you might be committing heresy by imagining changing fundamental things about TiddlyWiki. But on the contrary, speaking for myself, I really like that. And one of the things about TiddlyWiki's very layered architecture is that most of the things, I don't think I've read all of twaddle, by the way, yet. It's but I'm really enjoying it when I do read it. But the stuff that I read in general, because you're so familiar with how TiddlyWiki works, it's usually expressed in the right way, if I can put it like that. I mean, it's expressed in a meaningful way, you know, knowing how the story river works, knowing that there's a sidebar, how the reveal widget works, and all that kind of stuff, you know. So it's knowledgeable, and often I think something like that story view that you're suggesting, you know, isn't at all heretical, because you know, the whole idea is to be able to slot in other story views, and I think you've correctly grasped what constitutes a story view, if you see what I mean, what it has to do, what behavior needs to be defined, and as I say, quite a neat definition of that behavior, I thought.
Yeah, you know, I think the best way for people to know what we're talking about is simply to go to that site, twaddle.tiddlyspot.com, and it's I update it irregularly because of the saver mechanism. You have to correct me if I'm saying something wrong now, Jeremy, but I do all the work on another site, and because it's a bit of a fuzz to upload things, and because TiddlyWiki, when you upload something, you overwrite the full existing, you replace the full existing TiddlyWiki. This means that I'm doing a lot of work, and then I'm kind of it takes a while between the updates, but when they do update it, it's a bunch of new tiddlers and articles at the same time.
So sorry, you're saying that the wiki that we see at twaddle.tiddlyspot.com, you edit somewhere else and only occasionally push to TiddlySpot, publish to TiddlySpot.
Exactly. I have loads and loads of articles actually that are semi-finished. You know, they're not quite ready for viewing yet. So I write a lot of stuff. I have so many ideas all the time, so I write them in parallel, and I, you know, let them mature and think about them more. And when things get ready, I kind of push out.
So does the way that you work and think match? I think you used Tiddly Space, didn't you, Matt? When
Previously, yes.
Did you like the way that it worked in terms of having tiddlers that were private that you could then flip a switch and make public?
Yeah, that was really good. But even better was, of course, the inclusion mechanism that they had for dealing with single tiddlers rather than the whole TiddlyWiki. Yeah, that's terrific.
Well, I was the one observation I'd make is concern that I don't know if, let me screen share so that everybody can see what I mean. That when one first visits the site, you've got this CSS animation, and then click me taking you to this tiddler about spreading the word about TiddlyWiki and enlarging the community, which I think, and then one has to actually go into these side headings to find the material. But I wonder whether did you consider, would you consider making it so that the homepage perhaps showed the recently modified tiddlers or something, so that there was more kind of to see when one goes there, because it's actually a very active site with lots of material, but it's not immediately obvious when one visits the site for the first time.
I agree. Actually, there is a bit of a conflict with the sidebar there, because I had to remake the recent sidebar, the tab in the tab recent, so that it only shows the articles that are updated and relevant to be considered. I tweak my articles a lot. So,
okay, and you want to be able to tweak them without changing the order in the recent changes list.
Exactly. So I made a special, the recent listing there is not the standard listing. And I also only want, there are only some tiddlers that I want to show there. If I make a change to one of the menu tiddlers, that shouldn't show in recent. I only want the articles to show there. So what was your, if I could make the default tiddlers be the latest tiddlers. Yes, I'm considering doing this thing where you see like a teaser of many articles. I've been experimenting with that, and it's something that I intend to do. Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Well, funnily enough, one of the things that I've been working on just a little bit in the last couple of days has been improving the view on the iPhone. And this was, well, sorry, not on the iPhone, on narrow screened mobile devices. And this is prompted by quite an interesting conversation on Twitter where somebody said, and I might as well quote the exchange, any plans to make TiddlyWiki actually usable from smartphones stroke tablets? Even with TWEdit, it's a pain on the iPad stroke iPhone. And so I asked him what his thoughts were, or sorry, asked them, I'm not sure who it was. And they then tweeted a number of issues. First being that saving is not possible without using TWEdit, which actually tiddlywiki.com does say that, but it kind of probably needs to make it a bit clearer somehow. And there's a problem that where sometimes content gets wider than the screen and you have to horizontally scroll. And there's a problem, well, this was the one that I was going to talk about. Multiple tiddlers quickly get unwieldy on small displays, maybe fold tiddlers not being looked at. And I take that to be that it should work something like mobile Wikipedia does, which is, I think, highly effective, where you just get the headings and then you drill into the heading that you're interested in. And I think that was right, that we do actually, on mobile, if not elsewhere, we need that ability to be able to fold tiddlers. And if we made it so that if you imagine having a different template for the folded version and the unfolded version, one of the things we could do is make it so that the folded option showed the top 100 pixels or something over the content and faded it away or cut it off or something. And I may as well just carry on to talk about it. He was also saying the sidebar is hard to reach on the iPhone. Maybe part of the sidebar should stay on top of the screen at all times. And that's actually the one that I've been playing with. So let me just screen share and show you where I'm up to. Matt, do you use TiddlyWiki on a phone at all?
No, not much at all. Twaddle, for instance, doesn't work on a phone. Since I do, the editing in general on a small screen is just not a good idea. Yeah, that doesn't work there, as you can see.
This is.
I think primarily the small screens are for reading rather than working.
Yes, absolutely.
If we want people to use TiddlyWiki for public sites, then I think it's a necessity with small screens for sure.
Yes. I must say, I mean, that would be my view as well about using a phone for viewing rather than editing. But then I've continually been surprised by the devices that people choose to do things on. And I do, once in a blue moon, want to do crazy things on my phone. The best internet access device is the internet access device you have with you.
How does it, your iPhone watch that you showed me, can you go to websites on that, or it doesn't?
Oh, no, nothing like that. No. It's more like
this size browser.
Yeah, but some apps for it do kind of treat it like it's a weird kind of WAP style web browser. And you navigate it with a wheel, which does slightly remind me of there were some in the WAP days when kind of lots of things that were glorified joysticks for moving around between links. And yes, the Apple Watch shouldn't be reminding you of that stuff. But let me just go back to screen sharing. I was going to very quickly show you I should show you the current situation. So the current situation on a narrow screen is that the sidebar moves to be above the first tiddler. So it's kind of not too bad. You see the default tiddlers, you can scroll down to see the next ones, but you have to scroll back up to get to the sidebar. And if you've opened a bunch of tiddlers and are far down the screen, then it takes a long time to get back up there, and it's almost impossible to find your way back to where you intended to be. So what I've just been playing with, and this is entirely experimental, and I guess we might withdraw it, is this arrangement where the sidebar is still triggered on a narrow screen with the chevron. But when it appears, it always appears at the top of the screen, regardless of the scrolling of the underlying story. And the overlay is independently scrollable itself. So it's kind of weird because I've made it 50%, and I'm not sure if that's right, but it's not, when you see it like a screenshot of how it is right now, it might not be at all obvious that you can scroll down and see more buttons. So that bit feels weird. And yet when I did it when it's full screen, conversely, it just feels a bit strange that disorientating that the screen's completely changed. Anyway,
but there are so many. I'm sure there are standards developed for this already. There are many other software solutions
Well,
where
what they
have
do
the
is
exact.
not unlike what we're doing here. We just the hamburger icon would typically stay fixed on the screen, and when you click it, it would slide in a menu. That's pretty much what we've got here. And one of the options, I guess, is to try and make the animation resemble the way people are used to that behaving. But I mean, I'd be happy if it just slid in from the top. Actually, having said that, looks like you're having a minor earthquake over there.
No, sorry, yeah, just on my Android phone, when you scroll, I can't bring it here because that's what I'm using to start now to see you, so I can't use it. But if we take this is simulated cell phone. When you scroll down, and when you're just watching the page, you see the text. But if you pull it just a little more down, then it gets exposed just for a little while. This top menu where you have the hamburger icon. So it's not visible all the time at least not in Feedly. I use Feedly, the RSS reader. And they have a pretty good interface, I think. And I think we could use a lot of things from, for instance, that.
Yeah, that's it is that animation and kind of scroll effects that.
But they have the menu comes in from the left. You click, and that works pretty well. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think that's exactly what it should be like. There is a hamburger icon in the built-in icon set. I kind of think the chevron, when you're at the large screen size, I think the chevron makes more sense because I do see it as shunting the sidebar off further to the side, so to speak. But I think when we're on a narrow screen, I think it should flip to a hamburger icon.
What I was asking was when you do bring out the menu on a small screen in Feedly, what happens is that it slides above, kind of like your.
Well, I think there's two bits of animation potentially that are missing. One is the hamburger icon maybe should slide out of the way when it's not being used and come back when you scroll. And the other thing is when you use it to summon the sidebar, it should animate. And yes, it should animate the sidebar in from the left. But I don't think, personally, I think the direction of the animation might not matter as much as it being a hamburger icon. That's the thing that some people are going to recognize. And currently, the icon overlays the tiddler controls in a way that makes it ridiculously and pointlessly unusable. So it's very much a work in progress. But I thought that the comments on Twitter were a good reason to, a good push to pay some attention to it.
Oh, actually, I've been thinking of something, and I twaddled on this. I think, unless it's not published yet. This is obviously an area of concern, but it's not really something that you've talked about a lot. And what I'm thinking is maybe there could be some kind of way to announce the current areas of concern where you think it would be good if the community put in effort.
Yeah, I kind of think that's one of the things that maybe the Hangouts and the discussion groups are kind of quite good at. I mean, I certainly, the reason why I picked up the camel case thing, making it easier to disable camel case, is because it kept coming up on the groups to the point where, it's just, rather than replying to yet another message about it with the same information, it makes more sense to just fix it. And as is often the case, it turned out that when I looked at it with a very sort of practical eye, that I could see a way of doing it that wasn't immensely complicated. I had been thinking of doing it via some other work that I'm interested in doing, but that would have made it a much bigger operation. But one of the things that open source projects are supposed to be better at than hierarchical organizations is by being able to have multiple areas of focus all at once. And in a way, I feel like that's what I've got, but also by everybody else in the community thinking about different stuff. But I guess sometimes the missing piece is bringing it to the attention of the community, and that's still too hard. And hence wanting to put federation on the agenda.
What do you mean it's too hard? Is that what you said?
Yeah, well, imagine if we had a central, what would we call it? Community.tiddlywiki.com. I don't think we should call it that, so I'll call it that for the sake of argument until we come up with something snappier and shorter. But it'd be very nice to have a site like that we could go to, and by some semi-automated process, one could see selected newly published tiddlers from sites that have been selected by the author and the author selected by the community. So it'd be relatively, for us, I think a relatively small group, might be a dozen people or something, and maybe we'd make it open so that anybody could join. But in order to, I don't know, I mean, you might ask people to sign something similar to the CLA, some kind of legal thing, and maybe even with a address on it or something, because it's one of the things that I've always wanted to avoid is being responsible for a space on the internet that anybody can publish anything, because it looks like a load of trouble to police, and I really don't want to have to police stuff. So, one of the things for me is if stuff's going to go out under tiddlywiki.com, I want to feel as able to deal responsibly with everything that is published as I can. So anyway, I'm sorry, I went off on a bit of a ramble, but you see what I mean, that that would be a really cool thing for me, to be able to go to one place and see an ongoing, interesting feed of stuff that, say, the authors have selected. I would imagine accessing that feed in a way that would allow me to filter it according to my own interests and stuff like that. But just doing it with a relatively small community, just doing it would be fine. With a larger community, one might need to do the filtering thing, but I think it's quite a scalable approach, in fact. So that's what we got to do. That I think is quite an interesting use case for federation. It's saying you continue to publish what you've already got on TiddlySpot, or elsewhere, and there is a process by which you press a magic button somewhere, and it triggers updating of a central TiddlyWiki with the latest updates that you have made. And anybody who's in this sort of group would have access to that button somehow. And there's a particular way I've been looking at implementing it. Amazon have a new service called, well, it's not new, of course, it's been out for about 1.5 years, I think, but it's relatively new to my consciousness. I've only been aware of it this year, I think. And it's a really interesting service. Maybe you know about EC2, an Amazon service. Amazon is a cloud computing company, so as well as a seller of everything and a shipper of everything, and the main products that they sell roughly is virtual computers in the sky. So you sign up and say, I want and you specify the processor and memory and stuff, and then they spin it up virtually, but on the particular, well, with at least the hardware that you specify, and you have very little control over where it's spun up. But you kind of get, it's as if you get your own Linux machine, or I think Windows machine, in the cloud, and you're responsible for it. So you, for instance, have to run software updates on it if you're exposing it to the internet, that kind of thing. And Amazon have been doing that for 10 years, more than 10 years, I think, maybe. And it's a hugely successful product. And most startups these days, they don't run their own servers. They let Amazon or one of the legion of companies that compete with them to do the same thing. But what Amazon and others are doing increasingly is moving up the stack, so that what you get, the thing that you buy, instead of being a server with all the complications that that implies of having to set it up and so on, that what you get is actually much, well, in the case of the thing I'm interested in, which is called Lambda, Amazon Lambda, you basically give it a bunch of JavaScript files, and it executes those JavaScript files under Node.js with a kind of defined environment. And then it dies. The environment that you get is thrown away, although in fact sometimes in practice it can be reused, but you can't rely on that. So what it lets Amazon do is spin up these kind of super servers that are just executing JavaScript tasks, which gives them certain advantages over sharing something as big and unwieldy as a server. But what it means to you and me is that literally running JavaScript in the cloud is as easy as it has always been for us to run JavaScript in TiddlyWiki. In other words, what Amazon gives you is, amongst other things, a text editor, and you type some JavaScript, and then you can specify how you want that JavaScript to be triggered. And one of the triggers you can arrange is, on a web page, a button that you click, and there's various options for authentication, passwords and stuff. So we could create the magic button, as I spoke about, could trigger the execution of TiddlyWiki doing its build up in the cloud. And in fact, it might be 2 or 3 of those tasks. One to go and retrieve the TiddlyWiki files, the latest version of Twaddle, and one to do the processing when that's come back in. But I think that's a viable approach where the community avoids having something as complicated as a server to go wrong, because, say, each time you press the button, it basically just re-executes the same JavaScript, and would give us the thing that I like, which is the ability to open up publishing on tiddlywiki.com to a much wider audience than, sorry, not a wider audience, sorry, to a much wider set of people than just me, because at the moment, for some time, it's been only me that can push updates to tiddlywiki.com.
So what is the what's stopping you or us from doing what you just described? Fine? Well,
I haven't. So far, I've only been reading about Amazon Lambda. It looks quite straightforward, but I haven't done the necessary work. But there's not much to it. I mean, there's sample code that will start, that you can write a JavaScript function that starts TiddlyWiki up and it executes a command line. But there are some missing pieces, like going out and retrieving the existing TiddlyWiki files. So
but that particular bit, Erwan, his community aggregator does exactly that, no?
Oh yeah, no. What I'm describing is pretty much the community aggregator functionality. But I mean, the way that he's done it, it is sitting there on a server that he has to manage and deal with if it falls over, and that's the bit that I'm not too keen on having to do that. I'm a very firm believer in this idea of publishing to the world through static servers. I think it saves an enormous quantity of headaches.
But maybe he would be positive to share his the coding solution for this the actual aggregation.
Yes, I can't remember what language I can't remember what language it was written in.
We can find it in forums because I've asked him about these things. But so is this something that you intend to implement, or
yeah, it's on the roadmap. As I said before, the well, the way that I want to implement it, actually, the way that I just described is a very Node.js and Amazon Lambda centric way of doing it. One of the things that I have learned doing TiddlyWiki is that exposing functionality to people who are using the single file edition is really important, because it's those people who previously or otherwise don't have access to the kind of things that TiddlyWiki can let you do. So bringing the ability to experiment with federation to them seems really important. So in order to do it, well, yeah, but I think you're also plenty techie enough to jump the bridge into Node.js, and and one of these days there'll be a strong enough reason that you do so. But if there doesn't, then for me that's still a win, because I kind of like having users who are firmly using TiddlyWiki in the browser, because that's what keeps me focused on the experience for people using it entirely in the browser. But so that's what I was going to say very briefly. Sorry, Matt. That in order to do federation in the browser, we need to do a couple of things. We need to incorporate that fetching step into the TiddlyWiki core, and to do it in a way that works both on the client, both in the browser and on the server, You remember me talking about the technique for the plugin library, where we load it in an iframe and then talk to it with the special messages, and only got half the one side of the implementation of is that the TiddlyWiki inside the iframe should be using the web interface, the web server interface, across that messaging interface, tunneled over the window post message, so that we can reuse the existing code, and so that we can get a very flexible way for both the browser and the server to federate in the same way, using the same mechanisms.
And is this something that other people than you could work on? I mean, it's such a big thing. It's such an important thing. If this was implemented, it would be such a huge thing for the community, I'm sure, or at least I imagine. And so, you know, I think this is one of the areas that would affect the most things in the community. So is it something that, you know, what would it take? What would it take for it to be implemented? What can other people do?
It would take a developer who's familiar with the core, and that's kind of always been the problem with, or I shouldn't say problem, has always been a characteristic of the single file edition of TiddlyWiki, that its users are not developers. And so in the scratch your own itch thing, you get a lot of cases where there are developers who you know are making stuff that's useful in the browser without themselves being focused on the browser browser ways of using TiddlyWiki. But
I have Eric owes me 4 hours of sweating, and could you define something that would take about 4 hours? And I would be very, very happy to hand it over to him. Maybe he even forgot it by now. If you hear this, Eric, it's from the Inside TiddlyWiki funding thing.
That's a good idea. So at the moment, Eric, as far as I know, doesn't readily have the ability to run under Node.js, so that means he can't build TiddlyWiki from its component parts, and that's probably a prerequisite for working on it. But I don't know. I mean, one of the things I was going to suggest is that if I documented the plugin library interfaces, then it would be rather easier for people like Eric and you, but perhaps the two of you putting your heads together as well, to create stuff that was based on the same mechanism. So we could, at the moment, the plugin library, it only knows how to load these special HTML files that contain the plugin library, but well, it knows how to talk this interface that at the moment, the only thing that talks this interface is those special HTML file that contains the plugin library. But that's quite a that's a straightforward piece of HTML that with a bit of JavaScript in it that's got nothing to do with TiddlyWiki. It's just pushing messages about. So it'd be rather easy for a JavaScript developer like Eric to work on that, in fact. So yeah, that's plausible. But it depends which way we go, you see. The downside of going the browser route is it doesn't really help the original goal that I mentioned of allowing us to give the right to a defined TiddlyWiki community to publish updates to community.tiddlywiki.com, incorporating the latest pull from their own sites. So because the best we could do with the browser mechanism is to pull the content into a browser instance of TiddlyWiki, then do a browser save, save changes, and then upload that to TiddlySpot, or sorry, for the saver to be the TiddlySpot saver. But that in fact, in the particular case of TiddlySpot, would mean shared credentials, that everybody in the authorization would be everybody knowing the username and password of the TiddlySpot, and that's not great.
Mm-hmm. So another route, I guess, would be to make the Node.js version more even easier to use, so that people will start.
Easier to use. It really couldn't be. It couldn't be easier to use. Although I was helping somebody this week to use it, and I'd given them instructions that included installing Node.js, and then how to run the TiddlyWiki build command, which is one command with 3 words in it. But I'd completely forgotten the step of installing TiddlyWiki, and they were tearing their hair out, or well, confused why the commands they were typing didn't work. So that is an issue, that however simple I say using TiddlyWiki under Node.js is, it's still 10 times more complicated than using something in the browser. I mean, for people who've never crossed that threshold before, if you see what I mean, and if you don't have any useful working assumptions, whereas I sat in front of the BBC Micro 30-something years ago that had pretty much the same interface as the command line. So, but having said that, the instructions installing on Node.js, which are on tiddlywiki.com, have another look at them if you've not looked for a while, because I'm now looking at them again myself, but they're maybe not laid out super clearly.
I tried it close to a year ago, I guess, and in the end, I had to go with the normal one file solution. But maybe I'll give it another go.
I mean, the thing, it's not at the moment. In some ways, it's not as flexible as the one file solution as well. If you're working on any kind of mobile device, often pushing to TiddlySpot is more reliable if you're on Wi-Fi than messing around with the Node.js edition. you know, as in if you're on a platform that doesn't support Node.js.
Are there other like restrictions or even interface differences when you actually use it?
Well, what it does, no, not so much. I mean, the JavaScript engine, you know, TiddlyWiki is mostly JavaScript. You can kind of ignore the HTML bits. The JavaScript engine under Node.js is basically the same as in the browser. So TiddlyWiki works in almost the same way. The differences, though, are that in the browser, we can directly manipulate the DOM, which is to say we can make things appear on the screen. Under Node.js, there are only two things that we can do. We can read and write files, well, that writing files is the main part of that. And we can talk over HTTP to a browser. But you know, of course, we give the browser a TiddlyWiki that we then talk to the TiddlyWiki in the browser. So that's two things that the Node.js edition does. Node.js configuration. One thing that the browser edition does, which is to render itself against the DOM in the window, well, in the document that it's loaded in. But those three things, you know, they're the same because they all use the same parsing and rendering engine that makes up the heart of TiddlyWiki, but you know, the way they're exposed at the ends is kind of different, and it certainly takes I'm sure it must take some understanding of the internals before the similarities kind of slot into place. But one of the breakthroughs in terms of understanding the Node.js edition is that it is exactly the same as the browser edition. So you know, you can try things out in the browser. For instance, when things go wrong in Node.js, it can be quite inscrutable. You know, you can't easily say, show me the value of this tiddler, the text of this tiddler. I mean, you can do things like that, but it's fairly tedious compared to just poking around in the browser. But you know, I don't know. Maybe you'll never. I said right at the beginning that maybe the time will come when you something pushes you over the barrier, over the precipice, over the crevice, and you. But maybe not. You know, maybe not. Do you use TiddlyDesktop?
No, I don't actually. It's another thing I should look into. I never quite got what it does, but now I understand it's good if you use multiple TiddlyWikis to manage them, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't do enough of the things. So at the moment, it's in many ways, it's an inferior experience than using TiddlyFox in Firefox. And the reason is because it's not as good a browser. It doesn't have, for instance, spell checking when you're editing. But the potential is indeed things like being able to upgrade all your TiddlyWikis in one go, and you know, and doing backups. I would also like with TiddlyDesktop to expose each TiddlyWiki as well as opening it in a browser window to optionally expose it via an HTTP interface, which would let you then open that TiddlyWiki in another browser, but you'd get the single tiddler at a time synchronization that it would then sync back to TiddlyDesktop, which would save the changes, which would be quite useful in some ways. It would allow you to have TiddlyDesktop managing your TiddlyWikis while still using your favorite browser to actually do your editing and stuff. But at the moment, I still use Firefox, TiddlyFox as my main single file TiddlyWiki solution. So
is TiddlyDesktop, is that a standalone software, or is it also an HTML file displayed in a browser?
I know TiddlyDesktop is on Windows, it's a .exe, and it's an application on Linux and the Mac. So it's a standalone application. It's based on something called nw.js, which is essentially a template application that is an instance of really weird and amazing, an instance of Node.js and a browser kind of crashed together. And it allows you, if you know either, or in my case both, of the browser and Node.js, it lets you do amazing things, because there's plenty of things that you can't do under Node.js that are really easy in the browser. The browser, for instance, you can manipulate images, save JPEGs, and draw to a canvas, and that kind of thing is actually quite tedious under Node.js on the server. You have to import somebody else's package to do it, and it's always a bit annoying. It feels like that kind of thing should be built in, but I mean, I could completely understand why it's not built in, having said that. But the TiddlyDesktop, I really need to do an update to it, but I think updating TiddlyFox is probably a higher priority. And yeah, hopefully get some of those features in.
Going back to the federation questions, I'm sorry, I come from it obviously from a non-coder perspective, so I don't always ask the right questions. But my impression is that you have a vision for how the federation would work, but that if people want to help along with this, they might not know exactly what to do, or they if they do something, it may be something that is not in line with your vision, and therefore they kind of do it, it won't get accepted, it won't.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that there's to go back to this point, there's no heretical perspective on TiddlyWiki. If somebody does something interesting, I don't know. I don't know that anybody has ever done anything with TiddlyWiki that I haven't liked. I guess sometimes people do things that I might want to see, might want to encourage them to improve them. But so no, I can understand the concern, but the whole point of open source is that many people can work at once on the same things, and that we have a mechanism for handling disagreements about what the thing should do. And that mechanism for us is plugins, and it's almost universal to capture controversial or functionality within plugins, so that people can elect whether or not to use them. And it's a great way, insofar as there's a bit much to use words like conflict over or disagreements over things like features, but there's plugins do work pretty well, I think, and that's one of the reasons why I've been focusing on the plugin library over the last few months, is wanting to ensure that our users easily get the advantages of a plugin system.
Yes, but it's not only for something as fundamentally infrastructural as the federation. It's not really plugins may be involved, but it's so big that it kind of it doesn't only involve plugins, and it doesn't only involve TiddlyWiki. It involves also tiddlywiki.com. And that's, if I understand, that's your domain, right?
Yes, but so a plausible way that somebody else could work on this without needing my cooperation in the meantime would be just to set it up on their own server and say, hey, look guys, this is what I've done. And to make it, just as TiddlyWiki is clonable, so people can take it and change it, that person would make it clonable, so that it would be easy for me to then put it back.
The thing though with that is that of the, how many people would you say have the capability of creating these kind of things? I mean, the coding skills. Well, you can probably count them on these fingers, right?
There's some stuff that I mean, I do most of the coding, So, most of the bashing out what TiddlyWiki should do is done by me. And as I understand it, that's not hugely unusual.
So wait, my point was that there are so few people that have the competence how to create something like the infrastructure for federation. That's the first thing. The second thing is you say that, open source, anyone can do it. Anyone is welcome to do it, of course, and that's the beauty of open source. However, when we also add that, they can do it and put it up on their own server and everything, there are so many steps that it just doesn't really, there are too many things for one individual to do.
The thing is that those steps.
Take Erwin's community aggregator. Sorry. Take Erwin's community aggregator. It's, I mean, it's a separate side thing. Well, yeah. He did it all, and he has it on his own server and everything, and it's not really. Obviously, TiddlyWiki.com has a very, very central part in all of this, and it's the only face that we have to the world. And
well, it's
so,
quite a good example, actually, because in the case of the aggregator, we could point community.tiddlywiki.com at a server like that very easily. It's one of the things that DNS lets us do. So it is, and back in TiddlyWiki Classic, we had a nightly build server that was like that. There was somebody in the community who ran and looked after when it fell over a nightly build server that was available, I think, at nightly.tiddlywiki.com. So it's not impossible to factor those things in. And I must say, I seem to remember suggesting that when Erwin first posted it, but perhaps I didn't.
But is that something that, even if you suggested that, is that something that he or I or someone else could actually do? I mean, I'm guessing.
Well, yes. I mean, let me confirm that emphatically. The way that it's been done here, which is by running a server, which is not my preference for doing it if I'm the one running the server, does easily permit us to make a DNS change so that community.tiddlywiki.com or some better URL pointed to that server. I don't think it's quite enough, though, because I think we also I'd like the aggregation process to be able to update tiddlywiki.com itself as well. I think that's necessary. It's normal for a website like any website to have a smattering of the latest content on the front page. Certainly, if you're trying to think about the website as anyway, I mean, so I don't know. Maybe it would work as a completely separate thing, but I'd kind of worry that then TiddlyWiki.com would grow stale and ossified because it was not being modified, and community.tiddlywiki.com, however lively it became, it would still not be the place where new visitors were turning up for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, to emphasize that we could do that. Let me see if I can. Right, do we have a link to it? There we go. Mm-hmm. Do you have a link to it, Matt?
1 second. Let me think. One second here. Okay, so I'm pasting it
I got it.
Oh.
There's yeah, you got it too.
Yeah, the very second what you said. I don't dare to bring up too many parallel things in my computer because it's already overworked.
And it was last updated on the 1st of May.
No, I don't think so. Okay, I'm opening it. No.
Am I looking? I was just looking at recent changes. Is that not? Oh, okay. I can see that it's listing last modifications 3 days ago, but I don't know if that's 3 days ago from.
Oh, from that time. It says there is one indexed wiki t5a.tiddlyspot.com, and that says TiddlyWiki version 5.1.9. So that would make it, if it was 7 months ago, that we didn't have 1.9 at that time, did we?
No,
yeah, it says it was indexed 12 hours ago there, yeah. at the top.
No, so but the TiddlyWiki I'm seeing here is 5.1.8. In fact.
Yeah, but that's not the content that it's presenting. The TiddlyWiki.
Well, my question about that is whether the content is whether the relative dates it's giving us are
okay, so
from today or from the
okay.
Date.
So
but
if
you
we
think
take,
it would be from today?
I think it is. I think he does this. It does this automatically. So. Yeah, and this is Andrew's work.
Yeah. And it
yes.
looks right. Andrew has modified just recently.
Yes. So I think it does, it does do these things repeatedly, continually, I should say.
I don't really understand. What else does it let me do besides see which sites were updated recently?
No, you can search at the top of that tiddler, the Getting Started tiddler, in the community search. You can search, by tags.
Yeah,
by
and then if I
author.
click on one of those things, it takes me to the target site. It doesn't show me the tiddler that it's got, if you see what I mean.
It doesn't show the specific tiddlers that you're saying.
Well, when I'm looking at it, I feel it's oh no, I've closed it. And let me open it again. When I'm looking at it, it always confuses me when I click on a link that the action of clicking on a link, I expect it to be opening the tiddler that was obtained from this other site so that I can look at it, but instead it's take me to that other site in a new tab. And the mild frustration is that my understanding is that it does have that tiddler baked into it. So it would be quite nice to have that kind of preview. But yeah, this is, I mean, I guess I'd like to show a river of news, basically, as the primary interface of something like this, which would be equivalent. And if we implemented threading, then we'd thread together tiddlers that, whatever the convention we decide upon is, have the same combination of tags or something would be threaded together.
Yeah, I know that when he first put out this, I think he did import the full TiddlyWikis, but then after asking around, he changed it so that it's only linking to those sites. It could be either way. I mean, after all, he is collecting those TiddlyWikis, and I think he's just not presenting the content. It could be either way. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. What the question is, what you would want it to do, and the question is, my question is, how can other people contribute to what you would accept on TiddlyWiki.com so that this can actually, become reality? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I guess the normal way, if somebody wants to express interest in working on an area, would be to talk on the GitHub ticket if there is one, or to create a GitHub ticket if there isn't one. And so quite often when we're in this kind of specific situation, so where there's somebody saying, I would like to do this, I lay out what needs to be done. And sometimes actually I make tickets for myself and open-ended tickets for others that lay out what needs to be done. But this is an area where it's so big that it would be very hard to write a description without knowing who it's for, because a description from scratch for somebody who knows nothing about the TiddlyWiki code, would be an enormous thing. I kind of think I know how much one would need to say, but it's, there is a threshold that I cross mentally where working on TiddlyWiki is about the code, unfortunately. And I suppose, but here we're also veering into.
I'm not asking, Jeremy, I'm sorry, I'm not asking, maybe you interpreted it as a question, how can I, Matthias, code?
I know, it wasn't, I wasn't answering that.
Okay, good.
No, I was saying that I think what you're asking, if I understand correctly, is there somewhere a good set of instructions that somebody who wanted to work on this could look at? And I was saying, no, kind of there often isn't, usually isn't, for kind of biggish bits of core work until somebody wants them. So sometimes I do write down in a ticket some kind of outline of what needs to be done. An area like this, it's not even clear that I know what needs to be done, if you see what I mean. I mean, and that's why it takes me a while to get around to working on some of these things. But this is also an infrastructure issue. This is about how do we work with Jeremy to change the way that TiddlyWiki.com works. And I think the answer to that again is the group and GitHub, but kind of both of them. I make plenty of infrastructure changes to how TiddlyWiki.com works as a result of discussions on the TiddlyWiki groups. So there's that, and there's, yeah, I think that touches the things that I think I was thinking whilst you were talking there. So I hope there aren't any obstacles to people working on features. The number one thing for anybody who's looking at something like TiddlyWiki, I guess, is you want to be able to go as far as you want to be able to go with the documentation and the source code, work on TiddlyWiki without talking to anybody. I think that's quite important. But for those things that require talking, which any kind of merging does, then we need to make that as easy as possible. And at the moment, yeah, that is GitHub's working well. GitHub's probably not working very well for us because we have far too many open tickets, but that's another story. That actually one of the things that we probably should discuss at one of these Hangouts.
I would love to do that, actually. Stepping back one bit in the the greater perspective here, my question is not exactly, it's not specifically about the federation, but more about, I wrote an article on Twaddle. It's called Focus of the Month, and it's a proposition to announce to the community through the Google group that, okay, this is the area of concern for the month. This is what I'm looking at. Anyone who wants to join in, you're welcome to do that. Because I think it could be valuable because it would create more of an environment where these things happen and where they are discussed, this particular area of concern. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just scanning it very briefly. I love the idea, but I don't understand why you've put me right in the middle of it.
Well, the thing is that it would have to be someone with enough authority. You're the obvious example for that, but it could be if anyone else.
I mean, I think it's quite important that I think I need to. I struggle, like I think lots of open source leaders, to do as good a job as I would like to with all of my open source, with all the aspects of running an open source project. And running an event like this is actually exactly the kind of thing that it would be brilliant if somebody else did and coordinated. In order to, the authority bit, obviously, is nobody wants to work for a month on something and then to find that it's not accepted or something like that. So one could imagine, though, somebody like Matt adopting advertising. Here are the next 3 months themes that we're thinking of, and getting people to express interest. So, for instance, the saga of the search box is a great example, I think, of something that's of interest to a lot of people. That specific case, it's already the situation that it's in is that there's a very concrete proposal, and I'm still saying that it's not quite as good a solution as I would like to think is possible. Although I immensely appreciate the fact that we as a community, and Felix in particular, have built it. Makes it really cool that you can actually try it out, and it means that I'm not guessing about what I think about it. I've had the chance to actually use it and try it out. So in that case, there is some kind of agreement that is necessary before we can proceed. But that's all that's needed. Is I all the time on tickets say I would gladly accept a pull request. A reasonable thing for anybody to do then is, okay, Jeremy, here's what I was thinking of doing. Bang, bang, bang. Do you think that sounds right? And then that makes it very easy for me to follow how that person is thinking and try and myself think through if there is anything missing. I guess. Let's give one of the, you had something new to show, which I think I got the impression was also in the realm of federation. So perhaps I can hand over to you and you can show us.
Yes, and there's the usual screen share questionnaire. The green button, is it?
Yes. And then I normally share the whole screen because it seems to get hopelessly confused if you share an individual window. Well, it doesn't show dialogue then. That's how it gets confused. And I can't see your screen yet, but the icons come up showing. Oh, yeah, I can see your screen showing me.
Okay. That is not one. Let's see. Yes. This is it. So the idea is a updater check. Here, you can see in the control panel that we're confirming here that I do have the latest version of TiddlyWiki. However, if I had an old version, it would look like, I will get the update wizard. And that's pretty much the thing I want to show.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's super simple. It's just an iframe that goes to the. I made a temporary copy of the upgrade, the TiddlyWiki upgrader site. I copied it, and I just added one little tiddler here that looks like this. You have the latest version, and in here the iframe does. I'm exiting the control panel here. So the iframe does simply this. It goes to the you have the latest version. The filter is title you have the latest version of TiddlyWiki version, and I insert my own version from my use TiddlyWiki, and if it finds it, if it matches the version, it says you have the latest version. If it doesn't match, it shows the other default thing, and that's all it is.
That's brilliant. So one very quick thing is I wouldn't recommend running the upgrade wizard within an iframe.
It works actually. It works well.
Yes. So the concern is that if accidentally by clicking around you trigger a refresh, then you'll lose the content of the iframe without warning. And if that content was the result of you clicking tediously lots of checkboxes as you select tiddlers that you do and don't want to upgrade, that could be a bit tedious.
Okay, you mean from because here if you click to click
so
file.
yeah, if you do something there and choose a file.
Yeah.
If you've got a random file around.
Old TiddlyWiki, yes, here.
And
in this.
Okay, and then now go to the tools menu and change the theme.
Which tools?
On the outer TiddlyWiki, isn't this fun?
Here?
On the outer TiddlyWiki. No. On the right sidebar, tools menu. Sorry, the
Here.
tools tab. The tools tab below. And now try, if you can, switch the language, but change the theme maybe. You probably only got, change it to vanilla or something.
I think I did it. Save. It says save changes.
Yeah, no. I think it is only a language change that will do the refresh actually, and you probably only got one language in there.
Yeah.
So I believe, and I'd be interested in your experience actually, whether it does work, that there are some operations on the outer TiddlyWiki that will trigger a refresh of that tiddler, which means that the iframe will lose its state. So that's the risk of running things in iframes.
I mean, you mean like what I'm doing here? I'm just, if I'm changing it.
There are some operations there that would cause the so some story operations will cause the tiddler to be regenerated, but the story handling is quite clever about trying to reuse tiddlers that are already in the DOM, and so that you can do things like open new tiddlers without causing a refresh.
Okay, so the problem is that it might refresh this the tiddler that holds the iframe.
That's right. Yeah.
And that would be a problem. Wouldn't it simply mean that you just start over again?
It would mean that you'd start over again, but that's kind of confusing, and it's kind of confusing that you're accessing the upgrader through a small letterbox, I would say. I mean, let me comment more. So that was just a specific thing to be aware of, is the risks of hosting TiddlyWikis in iframes. But the other thing is, I like the idea of an upgrade indicator. I think it's quite important that we do it as a plugin because, as I mentioned before, people need to be able to opt in to it because it inevitably involves a sort of tracking. But as it happens, a very benign sort of tracking, because we can do it completely statically. And I think you're absolutely right that an iframe is the way to go. But rather than displaying that iframe, I think we can do what the plugin library does, which is have an iframe that we load a tiny little HTML file, and that responds to JavaScript messages that basically say, what's the latest version? And that would allow us, I guess, to publish things like a what's changed tiddler, for instance, we could include. I don't know whether it's worth doing it. As ever, I think we need to make sure that the mechanism is easily adaptable for people who are publishing their own editions as well.
Because I think that like an update check, it's very much a standard feature for most software these days.
And it's a standard opt-in feature. I mean, we should quite possibly build the plugin into the core, but have it disabled with a checkbox, but offer a checkbox in the control panel that says check for updates on startup. Well, I personally think that to be useful, this check needs to be done every time you open the wiki. Otherwise, how often going and checking whether you've got an update is I mean, you might as well just go and check your version number. So to me, to be useful, I'm thinking about a traffic light that appears. Maybe it only appears if you're on a file URI. You wouldn't, you don't want people who are accessing your TiddlySpot wiki to be dealing with messages about upgrading something that they can't upgrade. So yeah, really like the idea, and that slightly different approach that I was suggesting just happens to fit in with the way that we do some other things, and I think avoids. But I like the idea. Well, plus instead of one of the things that we could do with the plugin library. It's possible that we could engineer an upgrade process. You know how the current upgrade process works essentially by you add your tiddlers to an empty TiddlyWiki. And one of the things I want to, and I did it that way first because it was easiest and I didn't have the plugin library. Now that we've got the plugin library, there is an opportunity to do upgrades in place, so to speak. We still need to keep the other upgrade library because you might have an inoperable TiddlyWiki, that doesn't work, that therefore you can't open it in order to trigger its upgrade functionality. But I think that would be a very handy thing to do at the same time. And as it happens, one of the side effects of doing that quite early on would be that you'd be detecting the version of the core that was available on the plugin library for the upgrade. So yeah, I like the idea. But perhaps I don't know if there's a ticket, Matt, but maybe you should create a ticket and point to your prototype. The other thing I was going to say about your prototype is it again demonstrates conclusively how thrilling it is what people can do with iframes. This way of you're using Wikitext to build up the URL of the iframe that's being displayed, which is amazing. It's within the browser using web pages as a building block. And I really like that you've been able to do that, albeit with this very crude technology, but it allows you to, well, to my second point really, which is again I think something that's at its best pretty cool about TiddlyWiki that you're demonstrating, which is the ability to be able to use the primitives that you do understand, that are within the browser side, working browser side with TiddlyWiki, to build quite ambitious communicative things, you know, which to the point we started with twaddle, really, that you acknowledge in your sort of humble approach to the writing how writing isn't always the best form of contribution, or you feel that you wish you were a coder and could contribute code. But you know, something like this shows how even with quite you know, elementary building blocks, you can build things that are actually quite demonstrate quite important concepts.
That's why TiddlyWiki is so amazing, of course. Could I, while we're talking about various ideas, I had another idea that I don't have a prototype for, but something that I brought up on Twaddle that I think is to me, it sounds like a really cool thing. It's the articles create a TiddlySpot directly via TiddlyWiki and pull requests galore. It's under the infrastructuring menu.
Sorry, pull request galore, and what was the other one?
Create, let's see,
create TiddlySpot directly vertically.
Yes. So the idea there, it would take some time if you are going to read it, actually. So maybe I can just, you know, explain it instead.
Okay, so you are in the one I've just read, create TiddlySpot directly via TiddlyWiki. You are suggesting that it would be cool if in the directly saving tab one could register for a new TiddlySpot rather than having to go to tiddlyspot.com to create the wiki. And I think that's probably possible. I mean, without TiddlySpot doing anything and subject to checking, but they have an HTTP post, I suspect, that is used for the creation, and so we could use that to create the wiki, ignore it, if you see what I mean, and then later use the saver, the existing saver, to save over the top of the wiki that was created as a result of the post. So yeah,
it is doable.
It's very doable. Yeah.
Because then the second proposal there, the pull requests galore, is, I think, a really, really useful thing for us, and it would ease your burden, or it would bring in a lot of pull requests, I imagine. The idea is that if you read documentation or something on tiddlywiki.com, and there's something that you want to change, you want to improve something on it, or you want to add an example or add some code snippet or something, you do it straight on tiddlywiki.com, and you upload it to a new TiddlySpot. And you know so it would be really much easier than to go through the GitHub procedure, and anyone could do it, you know, really easily.
Yes, I really like that idea. I mean, I do already accept contributions that way, particularly people submit translations on TiddlySpot, and it's quite easy for me to, well, it's quite easy for me on the command line to do all the jiggery pokery to download the file and deal with it. So yes, and you're right that if we did the first piece, the registration piece, then one could make it very easy. But I also I wonder in whether we could do the same thing with Git, because Git and GitHub it actually already has a very good interface for managing pull requests and all of that. Not necessarily right for the person making the pull request, but certainly okay for me. So again, one going a little bit further and a bit more complicatedly, if I manage to get my head around Amazon Lambda, one of the things that we could do is we could have a form on TiddlyWiki, well, a button that you click on TiddlyWiki having made changes, which literally routes you off to GitHub, signs you into GitHub, creates an account, prompts you to create an account if you don't have one, and creates a pull request. And we could present our own interface for that, where you don't need to look at what GitHub's doing at all. And one could imagine that again might be quite a useful thing for a lot of people, because a lot of people use GitHub, and so a lot of people are interested, and a lot of people have I think the same issue, that they chose developers to collaborate, but they've also got their documentation or images or colors or whatever stuff that isn't code in there. And I think there's probably quite an appetite to make it easier for people who don't want to work with GitHub to work with that stuff. So yeah, I'd slight reservation about, I suppose, consuming resources on tiddlyspot.com, but last time I checked, the beds seem to be quite happy to be running such an overwhelming number of wikis. But I guess it's traffic. I assume that's much more of an issue for them than volume of wikis that never get accessed on the server.
We would have to get their blessing for it, of course. But so my question then is that I think this would be very, very useful if it was automated to work on GitHub, so that people, also non-coders, who feel that, oh, I am an English professor, and they should really change this sentence into that. That person should also be able to give his little contribution.
Well, yep, it goes back to federation, because the great if we focus our efforts on federation, we're solving the problem of group editing for everybody, not just for TiddlyWiki.com. One of the ways that federation could work is there's this network of people whose content is automatically published to community.tiddlywiki.com. But there could be a wider network of people where basically allow anybody to register, so that the aggregator listens for mentions from their site, so that they can fork a tiddler, make a copy in their own site, and then mention the originator, and basically offer the pull request stuff entirely within TiddlyWiki. And pretty much all we need pretty much to do that, the main thing would be, well, no, there's quite a few things that we would need to add, but they're reasonably well defined, reasonably discrete things that, yes, are distractingly easy to add. Matt, I'm realizing we're getting close to the end of time, and so to speak, not done too well against what I'd written down as the agenda. Well, we've talked about two of the most interesting bits, actually. We talked about twaddle and the plugin library mechanisms, GitHub and federation, which is certainly something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while more, as the federation stuff. I'd like to just very quickly take 2 minutes to show the TextSlicer plugin that I've been working on. Yeah, so this is something I've been having to do for my day job, but it's something that's cropped up so many times since I've been working with, well, showing people TiddlyWiki, and the issue is that TiddlyWiki has this axiom, has this thesis, that content is easier to work with if you cut it up into small chunks. And yet, most of the content out there is in the form of Word documents. And right now, it is quite difficult to take a Word document and turn it into a TiddlyWiki in a useful way. It's very easy sorry, I'm screen sharing, premature screen sharing. It's very easy to copy an entire Word document and paste it into one tiddler. But to make it into lots of tiddlers in a useful way is ridiculously overwhelmed. And basically, people have worked out some hacks for doing it in simple cases, but roughly, I don't think anybody does it. And yet, it seems vital because we want to make TiddlyWiki useful to people who live in the world of now, which contains lots of documents. And TiddlyWiki already has a great story in terms of exporting documents. So you can construct a text by threading together lots of tiddlers and then very easily export that as a static HTML file for other people to view. But it's the other way around that we lack anything. So back to screen sharing. The TextSlicer plugin edition is basically an addition just to, at the moment, to demonstrate the TextSlicer plugin. But the goal is that I'll bring together here a bunch of tools and documentation for this general task of slicing content up into a form that's useful in TiddlyWiki. So I'm looking at my local version, but its URL in the real world is tiddlywiki.com/pre-release /editions. There you go, TextSlicer. So ignoring the instructions, there's a new tiddler toolbar button, slice this tiddler by headings and lists. But before we do so, it's worth looking inside this tiddler to see what it is. And it's basically, well, it's made up text, it's lorem ipsum text, but it's headings, paragraphs, and once or twice there's some list items. And it just happens that I've been working with documents that minimal formatting is adequate for expressing everything that's important about the document. So now if I slice it, what happens is a new tiddler is created, sliced up sample text. And it's got a copy of the original text that is identical to that original text. But also, if I close the original sample text, makes life a bit easier. There's also a table of contents, which shows how this sliced up version of the text is put together. So for instance, sample text para 1, if I click on that link, we can see that it's some text, and I'll change it by adding hello Matt. And now if I scroll back up to the top, you can see that it's hello Matt. So you can see a correspondence between what we're seeing in this table of contents, which reflects the individual tiddlers, and the document, as I started to call these compound collections of tiddlers. If I turn on toolbars, it's clearer still. That's a heading for the whole thing, saying this is sliced up sample text. That's saying this is a tiddler called Introduction to TiddlyWiki, and it is being displayed as a heading. And then as a child of that, we've got a tiddler called sample text para 1. So in the case of a paragraph, I can rename it. So if we're going to say, we're going to add TiddlyWiki 5 onto the end, I click rename, and then that renaming happens. And in order for that to work, let me show you what happens if we look at an example like the tiddlers heading. It's got headings underneath it, tiddler types, and actually, yeah, tiddler types and fields, which are down here. If we rename tiddler types to types of tiddlers, then not only has it renamed the tiddler, it's also patched up all the references to it. So that tiddler, types of tiddlers, is in the same place in the table of contents. We can also edit paragraphs of text in place.
References, you mean then in that table of contents and perhaps tags to it?
It's tags and the list field are what gets updated. So here we've got this tiddler called tiddlers, which has got 3 children. If we look at one of those tiddlers, sample text para 10, you can see it's tagged tiddlers. So that's the thing that made it be displayed as a child of the heading tiddlers. And if we open the tiddlers and look at its fields, you can see the list field is used to set an ordering for those tiddlers. So hopefully that's roughly what you'd expect. What you wouldn't expect, and I intend to fix, is the way that headings are done. If I go into this heading, then you can see there's a baffling macro which does magic, but basically it then renders the actual title of the tiddler as an H3 heading. I think that's probably wrong, that the title of the tiddler should be independent from the text of the title. So basically we should be using a caption field, I think is more useful, because one wants to be able to use the tiddler titles to organize the content independently of using the captions, to communicate the content. So typically, the caption, the readable caption, should have the important words at the front, etc. Whereas the tiddler title, to be easy to find in a list, you might want to put, in a kind of hierarchical form where common words are closer to the front.
Yeah, that is super cool, and it's something obviously that the community, including me, have asked for a long time. So it's really cool.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad it's. I hope it's helpful. What we need to add is drag and drop reordering and creating new paragraphs and headings and so on in place. Then I think we'll, in quite an interesting way, perhaps have removed some of the need for a WYSIWYG editor, because we'll be expressing some of the most important structure of the document in a way that the user can directly manipulate.
But the WYSIWYG editor would be, you're not really editing the text there, are you?
Yes. So that inline editing that I showed you, the goal is
the headings or the text?
The text, the whole thing. So the goal is to adapt to the point where the entire interface for interacting with this document, most of the time, would be via, ignore this table of contents at the top, but would be via this, so that one directly edits what looks like an ordinary version of the document. Those toolbars look a bit unsightly at the moment, but imagine something subtler hovering off to the left. You click edit, and again I've reused the existing edit template, which isn't really appropriate because it's got all this stuff in which probably isn't necessary. But one of the things I want to be able to demonstrate is how, once you've done this, once you've cut a document up into individual tiddlers, how you can then do quite useful things such as, imagine being able to tag individual tiddlers as being advanced, and then having a checkbox that controls globally whether those tiddlers are displayed within the document. And you can imagine in other settings, situations where you're able to omit or add information according to what the user has already done. I really like that. I like the idea of using TiddlyWiki as the scaffolding to create a structured document, but also to model logic around it. And so that logic would typically be making a route through it.
That's brilliant. But how did that? What did that have to do with WYSIWYG? I didn't get it.
I see. Well, so I believe that people want WYSIWYG editors. So WYSIWYG editors is a common request for TiddlyWiki. But my observation, and I've made this many times, is that almost always people say that they want WYSIWYG editing not for them, but for somebody else. So they're saying, I love TiddlyWiki, I use it for such and such. I've got these bunch of users. However, for them, it's going to be a real obstacle using it without WYSIWYG. And I completely get the problem that if you're not of a certain mindset, it looks very alien that TiddlyWiki is a writing tool without any of the familiar furniture of a writing tool. So in my imagination, even if people aren't busily bolding and italicing what they write, there is something comforting about recognizing that you're in a traditional writing environment. And the writing environment that we can replicate here is actually that of an outliner, basically. So the outline mode in Word. I don't use Microsoft Word much, but when I did, I used outline mode a lot. And I think it is quite common for people who are working over the entirety of a big complex document. You know, if you're diving into one section of a big complex document written by somebody else, you probably don't need to use outline mode. But if you're jumping around, navigating, updating, maintaining a complex document, then it does seem to be. So we can do a pretty good job of that. And in outline mode, one of the oddities is because it makes WYSIWYG the structure of the document. What you see is what you get in terms of the structure rather than the formatting. But that it includes enough of the formatting that I think it's enough scaffolding that it might make that question disappear. So when you show, if you imagine, so it needs to be a lot more user-friendly than it is at the moment, but imagine showing something that shows a recognizable document with headings and so on. Press some buttons, start editing it. That kind of, maybe there's a chance that it won't cry out. There will be H1 buttons, H2 buttons, those kinds of things. So there will be some familiar furniture.
My spontaneous guess is that when people write or when they say WYSIWYG, they think of the formatting.
I think so too.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of that, I found something that I just want you to take a look at. It's called the Medium Editor. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Of course, yeah. But it's the old problem that these there are lots of good solutions for HTML editors, and BJ has already integrated one. So if that's the requirement to be able to edit HTML content, and that's quite a useful thing, that's already cracked, and somebody else could do it with the Medium editor. The disadvantage is that what you end up with is HTML, and often, well, increasingly nicer HTML than you used to get. But the challenge is to convert that back into wiki text. Plus, in the case of transclusion, you've got these issues that you want to be able to edit the transcluded tiddler, not a copy of its text. So I think it's actually the only way we can build those off-the-shelf HTML WYSIWYG editors into TiddlyWiki is as a way of editing HTML within TiddlyWiki. We could improve some of the features of HTML tiddlers within TiddlyWiki, such as making it possible to put links in. I think, well, links work to some degree, but I'm doing a better job of integrating links and maybe even some macros and a few things like that in HTML. Or we need to develop a WYSIWYG editor that would be based on, well, it could be based on techniques that, what's they called? Wikimedia have a WYSIWYG editor for Wikipedia. I'm not sure that it's been a very easy project for them, if I remember correctly, but it's quite an ambitious thing. And it's the idea is to be able to round trip wiki text into HTML for editing and then back out of HTML into wiki text. And that's not an impossible problem, but it's tricky. It's quite hard.
Why? If I understand the Medium editor right, I posted the link to there, by the way. Those watching this, it's on GitHub. It's called the Medium. Is it a hyphen or what do you call it? The vertical small line, the horizontal small Medium line editor. The as I understand it, you select the part and it injects the HTML commands around that selected text. Why can it not just inject wiki text commands?
Because it's a thin layer over a component in the browser called content editable, which is a bit of a weird name for it, but it's basically, it's a feature. So for any, if you haven't seen it, let me show you one of the fun tricks in a web developer's arsenal. Hang on a second. So let me screenshot. Okay, so go to google.co.uk and get some, we'll search for TiddlyWiki to get some search results. Okay, and now using the browser developer tools, we'll then go to the body and add to the body. How do I do this now? I can do it this way. Set content editable equals true. And the effect of doing that is that now, oh, is that Google's too clever for me. Let me choose a
simpler search engine.
A simpler site where they haven't perhaps been. So here's a, I'm very interested in the idea of lenticular printing. And
I have no idea what that is, but okay. Okay, so you're,
So, I mean, people have been, students have been pranking people for ages because I could...
Oh, and it stays there. Okay, hey, cool.
Yeah. It's... and I think that may... yes. So, content editable does all the heavy lifting of giving you a cursor, managing the selection, and so on. And what things like medium.js is mostly about the user interface for things like bold and italics, which the browser only gives you a JavaScript interface for. And frequently they're about cleaning up the HTML to get rid of some of the cruft that the browser often leaves behind in the HTML. But as I say, it's tantalizing because if you, oh, well, gosh, I should do, I don't know why I didn't do this to begin with. The tantalizing thing is this, that if I go to twaddle and do the same thing.
Going to mutilate twaddle?
Well, it just gives you a taste.
Yeah. Oh, so, yeah. Cool. Yeah.
And, you know, until we achieve that, we're not doing as well as I would like, let's say. Matt, on that note, I must draw to a close. Can
I finish up with one question?
Oh, please do, yeah.
For federation, what would you say that someone knowledgeable, what can they do next? Oh, you froze. Or did I freeze? Darn, did you cut off? I don't know what happened now. Maybe it was too much to ask with one more question.
I think one of us completely cut out, and so I didn't
yeah, exactly.
hear that,
now
sorry.
I hear you again.
Would you like to repeat the question?
The question is, someone who wants to contribute to the development of the federation and who has the competence. That's not me, unfortunately. What could they do as a next step? Something that you would find useful in that project. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, choose one of the 3 different ways of doing federation that we've discussed. And there's
could you say them 1, 2, 3? Just
one was federation in the browser, where using the iframe technique, which implies, there's some things I've said about exposing an HTTP interface over window post message that's implied in that one. Doing it on the server, doing it as Owen has, where for all I know, the back end that stitches that TiddlyWiki together might be written in Ruby or Perl or something. So yeah, number of different ways. And I guess in practice, the only motivation for working on something like that is if you need it for yourself. And if you need it for yourself, then your requirements, your constraints, your things to consider are the things that apply to you. And I think it'd be very discouraging for somebody to take on my constraints and thoughts about it as a first step, because I just don't believe anybody sits down to contribute to an open source project, if you see what I mean. That's not the goal. The goal is to do something for you. So in terms of federation, I think probably the most useful thing that I can do is to write more, so that people who want to can follow my thought processes. To the degree that I find it difficult to get the time to do any kind of serious writing like that, then obviously talking about them at Hangouts is a good next step. And then it's about talking, because once there is an individual who's interested in doing something and they've got a use case of their own, then there's something very concrete to discuss. Matt, I must thank you very much for coming along today.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. It would have been very dull for me on my own, and it would have been a very short hangout. So thank you for that, and it's been really stimulating and interesting, and so really appreciate you coming along, taking the trouble. I don't know when the next hangout will be. I suddenly became aware that there'd been a 6-week gap, and so I wanted to fit one in just to show that I don't want them to stop, but obviously it was at very short notice. I may go ahead and book one now for the end of the month, which is, I suspect, the next time that I will be able to have one, just so that I give people more of a chance to come to it. But in the meantime, thank you. Thank everybody who's watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you at the next TiddlyWiki Hangout. Many thanks. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.